Welcome. I'm Larry Rinder, the director of the Berkeley Art Museum and Pacific Film Archive, and I know that some of you have come from great distances to be joining us to honor the memory of the beloved Professor Emeritus James Cahill. Excuse me? This is, of course, a bittersweet occasion. We miss Jim terribly, and yet we've come together to remember his warmth, his wit, and his wisdom. Jim was one of the most important figures in the history of the Berkeley Art Museum and Pacific Film Archive. He laid the foundation for what is now one of the very best collections of Ming and Qing Dynasty Chinese painting in any university museum in the country. He curated many extraordinary and groundbreaking exhibitions here, and even served briefly as interim director of this institution. Jim's passion for Asian art is now permanently embedded in the heart of the Berkeley Art Museum and Pacific Film Archive. We owe Professor Cahill a tremendous debt of gratitude. It is our humble honor to host this memorial, and we are glad that you could all be here today.
Good afternoon. I'm Julia White. I'm Senior Curator of Asian Art at the Berkeley Art Museum, and I'm also a graduate of 419A, or in other words, a former student. I want to welcome you and thank you all for coming to this commemoration of the life of James Cahill. We remember with great fondness this extraordinary man who touched each and every person in this room. Most of us knew him as a great teacher, a connoisseur, a writer, and a legendary speaker. We also remember him as a masterful musician, a movie aficionado, a great wit, and a magnificent storyteller. Many of his former students, friends, and colleagues will be speaking this afternoon about their memories and their experiences with James Cahill. More personally, he'll be remembered today as a loving and proud father to Nick, Sarah, Benedict, and Julian, as well as a doting grandfather to Fiona, Abigail, Nora, Phoebe, and Miranda. They and others will share with us today warm and personal memories of him and his influence on their lives. Of the many accolades we'll hear today, I would like to focus on just one, and that was his extraordinary generosity. A lasting memory for me is of an incredibly generous man who shared his knowledge and his passion for art with the world through every means available, including new technologies. Thanks to his foresight, he created a rich resource for future students through his online video series. One of the filmmakers, Skip Sweeney, who's here today and who has worked with him on that project, told me that Jim had said to him that it mattered very little what he said. He just wanted us all to stop and look carefully at the paintings. We know differently. It did matter a great deal what he said and how he said it. To my knowledge, he never turned down a request for information, never thought twice about sharing research, books, slides, articles, music, nor his opinion. Every former student can surely recall a time when Professor Cahill gave them a stack of photos or notes with words of encouragement to see what you can make of this. His generosity to this university, and especially to this museum and its students, faculty, and curators, will be felt for generations through the wonderful classical Chinese and Japanese painting collection that he built over many years. We'll present a selection of those paintings in a special exhibition later this summer and fall as a way of honoring his legacy. There is so much to say about this man, and today, as I said, we'll hear from people from all facets of his life, and we will all remember fondly a man who changed our lives forever. But first, we'll begin by watching a wonderful array of images of James Cahill from the curly-haired boy of his youth onward in a video of memorable images of Jim amongst family and colleagues throughout the years.
Hello, I am Marianne Rogers, one of the oldest students. And I'm going to read a letter, not to you, to him. Dear Professor Cahill, Sensei, James, Jim, I know you are here. I can't imagine you not being here. Actually, you seem to be everywhere we go. Now you are truly scattered among 100 cities. Howard and I were in Japan last week, where many of your old friends have moved on, but the keepers of their memories, the younger folk, felt they were in the presence of greatness just talking about you. We walked the narrow streets of Kyobashi and Nihonbashi, past your favorite haunts. We're shown a book bag and typewriter you had left behind so many years before. And we toasted you over some tasty morsels in a tiny tempura bar right near where you used to stay. Our friends in Japan were quite moved when we told them that one of your wishes as the end drew near was for Japanese breakfast. Do you remember Julia and I making a late-night foray to the market to get miso and tofu and fish and seaweed as soon as you made that wish known to us? Your eyes gleaming as memories of that wonderland of Japan welled up in your mind's eye. Do you know that your reputation there as a fast roller lives on? When visiting shops in Japan, one expects to linger over a painting that's being slowly and ceremoniously unrolled, but that just wouldn't do for you. You wouldn't have it. In Taipei or Beijing or elsewhere in China, it was much easier, since no such rules of etiquette applied. And when Carol Conover was assigned to show you a slew of paintings at Sotheby's in New York, she was sure it was going to take more than one day out of her life. She was dumbstruck as the paintings flew through your nimble hands like so many electrical shocks or shapeshifters. So much to see, so little time. Looking was a big part of what it was all about when you were trying to find something that was worth having and that you and Dorothy could afford to buy. Seeing was even more important when you began to translate those paintings into your inimitable words, and even as you lay prone, confined to your bed with thoughts of your mortality running amok, you encouraged Howard and I, during that last visit, to have a look at some screens in the attic, have a look at some paintings still on the shelves of the almost barren library. Go have a look. Tell me what you think. Nothing had changed, except that you couldn't move from that bed, from that tiny room that was holding you in, and which was the last place you would see. You didn't let us forget, though, that there had been a you beyond the world of Far Eastern painting. Chinese painting had been your home, your comfort zone, even when you found yourself in mortal combat on a riverbank, and where you welcomed with open arms all the world, engaged the world in this passion, challenged us with its demands, blessed us with its gifts. Stepping out of that nest, that fortress, were boulevards to countless directions, in countless directions, to every kind of literature, popular culture, all manner of things. How did you find time for so much and such diverse mind traveling? In that way, you were just like the great Professor Peter Budberg, whom you claimed as mentor and teacher, and whom you admired above all others. I remember Professor Budberg strolling into our beginning classical Chinese classes and delivering spontaneous soliloquies on whatever had caught his eye as he walked to campus, whether an announcement of a concert plastered in some window, a bird's nest that had tumbled from a tree, or a student with a mohawk haircut. You did not simply inherit Professor Budberg's art history gene. You followed in his footsteps along labyrinthine and multitudinous paths. And there were your further gardens of delight, whether a stage where you mounted your prankish skits, a beach where driftwood and pungent breezes consumed your spirit, a piano waiting for your attention, or a movie screen that held such special magic. Weren't we lucky to have little cinemas around town and then the Great Pacific Film Archive? Your tastes in film were broad and vast, so when you were staying with us on our remote hilltop in Japan, We did not imagine that you would excuse yourself and head for bed, actually race for bed, when Howard and I sat down to watch a movie on our little TV. You could not bear the idea, much less watch a film entitled The Lair of the White Worm. We didn't know then that it was actually based on a Bram Stoker novel, which might have made it more acceptable to you. When we were nestled on the second floor of your house here in Berkeley, you in the room below, we were suddenly jolted awake at 3, 4 a.m. by the sound of your TV going on and some movie blasting your mind with its unique sound into whatever universe you had chosen to flee from your infirmaries and the inevitability that was facing you. Sound. It reminds us we're alive. You said yourself how much your whole existence was bound up with hearing sounds in your head. Not only music, but the sound of words, profound ones, silly ones. You were silly like us. And this served me well. Do you remember long after we left 419A for far shores, you would query on the progress of our dissertations, and I would immediately break into a sweat and break into a limerick about Daijin, or thrust my most recent dissertation limericks into your hands, and you would say, "Ha ha, that's good, those are good." You would move on rapidly to another subject, and I was relieved to have dodged another bullet. If sounds filled your head, the sound of your voice filled ours. Your words thundered through our lives with their enthusiasm, sense of commitment, the great joy at what you were communicating, even when you thought you were banging against a brick wall. And who could forget how you would grasp onto a notion, holding on, truly like a rabid dog with a bone. Your great nemesis, whose name will go unmentioned, Wen Fong, said in a rather thoughtful and philosophical manner at lunch with Howard and I some time ago, "Have you noticed that as I become older, I have become mellow, much mellower, whereas Jim, as he grows older, is becoming crustier and crustier?" No, we haven't noticed. You just continue to hold on to that bone and to bite back. You continue to have the spark, and you would until the end. And although it was approaching, we thank Sarah for letting us know that, ideas continue to materialize and plans to take shape in that endless landscape of your mind, where we had traveled and been nurtured for so many years. You had used your time in those fertile grounds so well and so efficiently, and yet there still wasn't enough of it. Reading your blog about the shortness of time you had left and the gradual loss of faculties was one thing. Seeing you lying there with you knowing that you would not leave that flat bed or that room was another thing altogether, especially when you uttered, "I have so much more to say. So much more to write, but there is no more time. I've run out of time." But people understood this. One of our Japanese friends and yours wrote, "Yes, we really miss the great scholar with such boundless energy in his studies. It is a great loss to the world of Chinese art. God needs to give him another life, as I believe, unlike me, he must have left lots of things to achieve and complete in this world." Another Japanese scholar who was close to you wrote almost desperately, "My heart is torn apart. I haven't shown him yet my appreciation enough for things that he taught me." I join her in that sentiment. Howard and I thought we would have another opportunity to see you, talk to you, thank you. In fact, we left you to return to Onamea Bay on a very high note, promising to come back with Amber in March, not so far off. You responded, "See you in March? Oh, that's wonderful. Yes, see you in March." Big smile, big smiles all around. Sadly, you would not be there in March. 3 weeks after we returned home, you were gone. What instruments we have agreed, the day of your death was a dark, cold day. But we are happy that you are here now, in the hearts of your family, your students, your friends, your admirers. You truly have become your admirers. And to quote Auden, just for you, yet again, "Follow poet, follow right, to the bottom of the night. With your unconstraining voice, still persuade us to rejoice. With that, I wish you happy travels in the landscapes beyond, and I remain Mary Ann, but you know what I mean. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. I'm Pat Berger. I think I may be an even older student of Jim Cahill, in fact. You know, we've all spent the last months trying to find words to celebrate the life of James Cahill, who was our sensei, colleague, friend, and pater familias. He was a man who was, and I think still is, larger than life. There have been many wonderful formal tributes in the press, and Howard Rogers' warm-hearted biography, which is in your program today, with many, many more to come, I think, in scholarly journals, and all of them testifying to his unrivaled career as a writer and art historian. He received all the highest accolades in the field: the College Art Association's Distinguished Lifetime Achievement Award for Writing on Art in 2007, and the Charles Lang Freer Medal in 2010. Jim was only one of 2 art historians to be invited to deliver Berkeley's annual faculty research lecture, which he did in 1982. His more than 24 books and catalogs, countless articles, and other more ephemeral writing testify to his unceasing engagement with scholarship. We all know he was a brilliant, original, and tireless art historian, and hand in hand with this, he was also a great teacher, blessed with exceptional charisma, eloquence, ease, and no small thing, a beautiful, resonant voice. He provided his students with the actual stuff needed to study Chinese art, real paintings from his exceptional collection that have mostly come to rest here at the Berkeley Art Museum, where they still are and always will be, part of active study and learning. Jim's formal awards confirm his commitment to teaching. He received Berkeley's highest honor, the Distinguished Teaching Award in 1985, and the College Art Association's Distinguished Teaching of Art History Award in 1995. But behind these accolades lies a more granular history and the more personal tributes that have been posted on his website, jamescahill.info, and on the memorial site launched by the Institute of East Asian Studies here at Berkeley. All stress this. That is Jim's role as a teacher, which blossomed into a major enterprise here at Berkeley that spanned more than 30 years. He had an indelible impact on all his students, molding us as professionals and as human beings. He was an intensely humane person with a huge appetite for life, as we heard from Mary Ann. And he conveyed all this delight in the world of things and ideas in the ways he chose to teach. Among other virtues, the importance of working with art hands-on, of knowing it in its material essence, as well as the value of endurance and the concept of the normative 80-hour work week. Those of us who had the privilege of studying with him know he was committed to the idea that no knowledge should ever be hoarded, that scholarship in art could only grow and flourish in sharing. Jim continued to share his insights with the newest generation of art historians right until his very last months, giving them his notes, often in very large boxes, and engaging them in the deposition of his papers and books to the Freer and to the Hangzhou Academy of Fine Arts. But he also discussed his research in progress and his latest exhibition ideas with a large group of students that included my own and budding art historians from all over the country, some of whom, among them Michael Hatch of Princeton, Joyce Tsai of Columbia, and Molly Everett from our own department here at Berkeley, came eventually to live with and care for him as he grew weaker. Through all this, he continued to hold forth, first in his kitchen on Josephine Street, then in his wheelchair, and finally from his bed. His mind was still clear, and he told me, and many others, his heart was full. The newest generation of art historians from all over the country who had a chance to meet and talk with him over the past couple of years, led by Berkeley's own Will Ma, have joined together, as you know, to produce a commemorative hand scroll reproducing one of Jim's favorite paintings, which is Wu Jun's Fisherman's Scroll, which they invite all of you to inscribe during the reception. Jim's own view of teaching and learning was, as he put it, based on Confucian principles that honor the transmission and preservation of knowledge one generation to the next. I think his legacy is safe. Jim's desire to pass on to the future everything he had learned and experienced led to his truly revolutionary foray in advanced old age into the virtual world of online learning through his lecture series, A Pure and Remote View, and his nonstop blogging on jamescahill.info. Jim was totally unafraid of technology. He led the project to photograph the holdings of the National Palace Museum in Taiwan in the 1950s, and he was a brilliant photographer in his own right who created a truly massive visual archive, which he continued to digitize up to his last moments and deploy in his lectures. He was unafraid of the podcast. Even in his last public appearance, which was at a symposium for the gorgeous Beauty Revealed show done with our own Julia White and Fang Chen, he was excited to share a computer reconstruction of the famous lingering garden in Suzhou. Look what computers can do, he told us. We all know that Jim had a holistic view of life, in which everything one did and saw came together in a singular and layered way. And so he shared his art historical life with us too, both in person and online, reminiscing about his boyhood in Fort Bragg, his love of the Marin Coast, where he took us to hike and meditate, his sense of moral outrage when our government went off the skids, his deep pride in his children and their amazing accomplishments, the trips he made around the world, the great and sometimes truly frightening food he'd eaten, the spirits he'd imbibed, the people he knew, loved, and couldn't stand, the films he'd seen, the music and operas he relished. His love of life was, I don't have to tell any of you, extremely contagious. Now, this was all folded into the decades-long unwavering commitment to teaching that first took on material dimensions when he returned to his alma mater, Berkeley, in 1963 from the Freer Gallery. He insisted as part of the deal that he be assigned not one but two offices, the first to serve as his workplace, the second to be used to house his significant library of scholarly materials and as an art seminar room for his students. This was, of course, 419A Doe Library, which is currently my own office. It was here that Jim's graduate students all gathered to study, to work on joint archiving projects, and where we listened to him pounding away, literally for hours at a time, on his Underwood, through the inexplicable porthole that connected our study space with his office. We learned fast that this was the sound of scholarly productivity, constant writing, nonstop. His face would pop up in this opening periodically, asking for a book to be passed through, or photos from the huge archive that was stored there, all diligently mounted and cataloged by us, of course, or just as often, to pass on the latest gossip. We were part of a global enterprise, the more so when Jim managed to raise funds from the Kress Foundation for two student-created exhibitions, The Restless Landscape and Shadows of Mount Huang, that were both held right here in the Berkeley Art Museum. Off we set with our fearless sensei in the lead to look at paintings and collections back east. Here's what Jim had to say about our art gathering foray for The Restless Landscape, when in Princeton in 1971, Jim's team of women came face to face with Wenfang's men. Seeing the potential in the plot, he loved to see life as a musical, he wrote, and I quote, I had a vision of a Gilbert and Sullivan-like scene in which Wen's group would sing of visual and structural principles in lusty baritone and tenor voices, and mine would respond as sopranos and contraltos with the doctrines they had learned from me. After which, they would all join in perfect harmony as the French and Italian musical modes are joined in a piece by Couperin and fall into each other's arms, reconciling these two schools of Chinese painting studies. I'm sorry to say that nothing of the kind happened. I learned only later that East Coast people were referring to us because of the Berkeley and leftward leanings of some of my students as Cahill and the Red Detachment of Women. Through all this, the seminars with 5+ carousels of slides, the day-long museum sessions working hands-on with real masterworks, the sales of Fun Bun to benefit the museum, the lectures he delivered while lying on a cot in 150 Dwinelle in excruciating pain from a back spasm, pointer waving bravely in the air as he showed us what Xiaogui could do. Jim taught us how to look at painting, how to write about it, how to bring it into public view, and how to carry the tradition forward with confidence. Now, we all know that Jim took strong positions, but he also let us watch him change his mind. we were very privileged to witness his intellectual epiphanies when he engaged in an impassioned correspondence with Richard Barnhart and argued fearlessly, I can't imagine how he managed it, with our department's Northern Renaissance specialist, the truly formidable Svetlana Alpers, who asked him pointedly what he would do when all questions of authenticity were settled. Well, we see where that led to the compelling image, the painter's practice, the lyric journey, pictures for use and pleasure, and so much more. His intellectual transformations, his embrace of the whole past world in which paintings lived, opened the door for the rest of us to study women's art, modern, contemporary, and popular art, Buddhist art, the economics of painting, and so on. Yet none of these exchanges with colleagues did more for Jim's thinking, I think, than his first trip to China in 1973, in the very last years of Mao Zedong. When he got the call from our State Department's Committee on Scholarly Relations with the PRC to join a group of archaeologists who had been invited to China just post-Kissinger and Nixon, he leapt at the chance. He detailed this trip meticulously in letters he wrote home and which his family, typically generous, shared with his students. Now, in his letters, which we 419A acolytes gathered into an alternative little red book, the immensity of it all is absolutely apparent, and his reactions are vivid. He's staggered by the paintings remaining in the Beijing Gugong, evading a trip to Zhoukoudian and Peking Man, to return over and over again to take notes, to shoot photos, to fret about his fading flash and his limited film supply. There isn't enough time to take it all in as he shuffled off to yet another banquet. He records his astonishment upon unexpectedly finding the Qingming Shanghetu undergoing remounting in the conservation studios. Nothing could be better. He delights in meeting the artist Cheng Shifa, who would become his very dear friend. He even relishes watching an operation on a thyroid tumor done with acupuncture and no anesthesia. At the same time, he bemoans the loudspeakers blasting agitprop and the tourist shops filled with garish things, yet manages to find small treasures to take home anyway and to give away. In one paragraph, he confronts the growing revelations of the trip head-on. After viewing a dozen or so paintings in the Nanjing Museum, he writes, and I quote, "When asked how many paintings they have altogether, they said 40 or 50,000. They repeated this incredible number several times. This is very discouraging to someone trying to compile the annotated lists of Chinese paintings. Makes one's work seem so tentative and trivial." Now, I was thinking that this last line should be set into a Gilbert and Sullivan-esque cadence, tentative and trivial, with the next line being, and I thank my husband Charlie Drucker for this, while viewing all the paintings in the Palace Most Imperial. But then I recalled that Jim's great friend and colleague David Keathley, who is here with us today, had come up with something much, much better for the occasion of the party here at the Berkeley Art Museum about 20 years ago, celebrating Jim's career. David sang in his sonorous baritone with Sarah Cahill accompanying on the piano. He is the very model of a Chinese art historian. A score of books on art he's penned, the titles make a splendid list, and so on. The very model indeed, never to be improved upon. I've been moving gradually into the present tense because I know that for all of us it's very difficult to accept that Jim is not here in the front row for yet another celebration of his life. We have to stop meeting like this, he said, dozing with that great white maned head tipped back but ready to pop up with the perfect comment the minute the lights come up. Alas, he's gone from this life, but I know you will all agree. His voice can never be stilled. Thank you.
I'm Judy Andrews, and I'm a student of Jim Cahill's middle period from 419A. I fell in love with Chinese painting when I was a freshman in college, and over the next six years, like Sudana, sought enlightenment in various places. In January of 1976, Nancy Schatzman, now Steinhardt, and I drove out to Ann Arbor to hear the symposium that Richard Edwards had organized for his Art of Wenzhongming exhibition. It was the first time that I ever heard Jim Cahill speak, and he gave a brilliant presentation of his Lumpers and Splitters paper. I was just back from 2 years in Taiwan, where 90 years of wool school painting had occupied the Palace Museum. Jim's lucidity in talking about the artists and paintings that had so fascinated me was dazzling. Equally compelling was his powerful presence as a panelist, in which he conveyed a certainty that whatever differences of method or opinion about any question, the scholars in the field would, of course, work together to approach the right answer. It was like a bolt of lightning. I knew this was the teacher I had been looking for. The saintly John Rosenfield, who was then my advisor at Harvard, arranged for me to take a year as a visiting student in Berkeley, confiding in me that Harvard hoped to hire Cahill to succeed Max Luhr, who had just retired. But when I got to Berkeley, and Jim invited me to share the utopian scholarly world he had created in 419A, it was hard to imagine Jim anywhere else. And then, once Jim had initiated me into the secret world of the point-raised seashore by gleefully daring me to stick my finger in a sea anemone, how could I leave Berkeley either? So I stayed, learning from him how to seek enlightenment, whether or not we can actually find it in this lifetime.
I am Ken Brown, another student of the middle period, and I was blessed to be a student of Jim Cahill's as an undergraduate. Then, of course, where could one else go back as a graduate student? And I represent also, I guess, the Japanese side, because Jim Cahill, in addition to being the scholar of Chinese art, was a formidable scholar of Japanese art, and there were a number of us who had the pleasure of working with him. In 1994, it was my honor to invite Jim Cahill to give the Getty Lectures at the University of Southern California, and rather formidable responsibility to introduce my mentor. So after sketching his many accomplishments as a scholar and as a teacher, the indefatigable man who would, with a cold, after flying back from the East Coast on jet lag, never miss a lecture or a graduate seminar, at the end of that presentation introducing him, I concluded with what he meant to me. And I quoted, without revealing my source, E.M. Forster on the pushful quality of art, the impossibility of being silent about great art, and how we are all warmed by the glow of the fire of the greatest artists. After the lecture, Jim said, "That's E.M. Forster, isn't it? 2 cheers for democracy, BBC Lectures." And of course, I was not surprised, but it still was absolutely remarkable. There's no question that for me, Jim was and is that pushful thing in my own career, personally as a teacher. And I think we all, every day, testify on his behalf, and his fire will warm us for a long time.
Hi, I'm Arnold Zhang. I studied briefly here at Berkeley, got my MA degree in 1978, actually in Asian Studies, not art history, but I am a lifelong Cahill student. After I left here, I went to Sotheby's and was head of the Chinese painting department there for about 15 years. Then after that, joined Howard and Marianne at Kaikado for another 10 years. And now I'm a landscape painter myself in traditional style. Quick Sotheby's story. In those days when I was working, this is the early 1980s, I was upstairs supposedly cataloging the important Chinese paintings, but we also had in those days a place called Arcade, which was down in the basement, sort of the bargain basement of artwork, all kinds of decorative items and things, and occasionally they would have Chinese paintings, and if they had good ones, they were supposed to call me down to take a look at them. But every day before I went upstairs to my office, I would go downstairs and just look around, see what kind of junk they were selling. And one day, there were these 2 large Chinese paintings that were in frames, very dark, and they hadn't called me about them, so they didn't think they were very important. And I was on my way upstairs, but I looked at them. One of them looked really terrible. The other one looked pretty decent, a landscape painting. But anyway, I had to rush upstairs to my office because I knew Jim Cahill was coming in that day to visit and look at some stuff. And I mentioned to him when he came in, though, by the way, before you leave, downstairs in the arcade, I saw a couple of paintings. One of them looked decent. Maybe you should, go take a look before you leave. So next thing I heard that he had gone downstairs and looked at the painting. He came back to me and said, oh yeah, one of them, you're right, one of them's crappy, but the other one looks like it has some quality and probably Ming Dynasty, decent painter. And he left a bid, ended up buying it. The two paintings were in one lot, and you know, a few $100, something like that, maybe a couple of thousand. He ended up buying it. And the funny thing was these two large paintings were framed, but on the bottom there was a piece of cloth on each one that kind of covered up the bottom portion of the painting, and so we didn't know what was under there. Anyway, long story short, he bought the two paintings, left the bad one, and reoffered it, reconsigned it to sell for whatever it would make. When he got the other one home, he removed that piece of cloth, and sure enough, there was a seal of Daijin, the 15th century master, and he had the painting later remounted, and it was, it's now actually, it's been acquired by the Berkeley Art Museum, and it was in the big exhibition, the Great Ming exhibition show that was at the Dallas Art Museum and the Metropolitan Museum. And the moral of the story is, number one, train your eyes. Number two, trust your instincts. Number three, put your money where your mouth is. And number four, if possible, surround yourself with friends, students, and colleagues who can share in the joy of making these small discoveries.
Hello, I'm Sarah Fraser, and I was in the last group or generation of scholars who studied with Mr. Cahill. I finished my doctoral studies in 1996, and I think our experience was different from the earlier generations, say that of Judy Andrews, Pat Berger, and Rick Vinograd, and we were envious of all the fun they had organizing exhibitions such as the Shadows of Mount Huang and all the trips to Japan and all the Bay Area outings. The Jim Cahill before retirement, just before retirement, was pretty much all business. And that was not such a bad thing. He had standards which he maintained until the end of his teaching career, such as taking Japanese, which I guess is something that's falling away these days. But most of these expectations were not articulated. He didn't exactly tell you what to do, and he just sort of expected you to figure it out. And the only thing then to do was to follow his lead. So in the late 80s and 90s, without all the distractions of the fun exhibitions and the social events, the only option was to emulate him. And that's what I set out to do. But with a professor at the top of his game, that was not so easy. The gap was enormous between those of us just beginning our graduate careers. The one activity that we did a lot of, and that was relatively straightforward, easy to emulate, was viewing art. So step one was obviously find lots of art and look at it. And steps 2 and 3 involved placing paintings in some kind of systematic order and then putting them in a workable interpretive framework. But the raw collection of data, that is working from a large sample of paintings, was probably the core activity, fundamental to everything else he believed in and did as an art historian. He kept notebooks and recorded all the painting he viewed, probably going back to his early years in Japan, a kind of modern version of the Tuhua Zhenwenzhi, the 11th century record of paintings seen and heard by Guo Rishu, written in the Northern Song. So in the spirit of emulation, I did this too as a doctoral student and kept notebooks of everything I saw, and I still do this. He was really generous with all the letter writing and wrote me endless introductions to get into the best collections and introduced me to key scholars in Japan, the PRC, France, Great Britain, and Russia. And back home, I don't mean to imply that there weren't extracurricular activities. There were always visitors from China, and most of the senior scholars I know in the field today are those that he invited to stay in Berkeley. It has become increasingly clear to me now that I've been in the profession for a couple of decades, something that I think Mr. Cahill would agree with, that we don't choose Chinese art history. Pursuing it isn't a choice. Rather, it chooses us. The scholars that he agreed to train were, like himself, drawn to the field, not for the money, fame, or recognition, but because there was nothing else that they wanted to do or could do with their lives. The core of who I am today as a scholar comes from him, and he fundamentally changed my life, and for that I will always be grateful. Thank you.
My name is Judy Whitbeck, and I came here to Berkeley in the fall of 1968 to work with two people, Joseph Levinson and James Cahill. Jim welcomed me into the fold, and actually he became really the thread of my professional tapestry, if you will. He welcomed me into the fold after the death of the person I hoped to work with in history, and included me in his Red Detachment of Women and in the Restless China Seminar, Restless Landscape Seminar, which was the most profound experience of my graduate work here at Berkeley. I also did the whole series, sitting in or taking or auditing his courses throughout the series. So he really taught me how to view paintings. When I got to be curator of the New York Chinese Scholars Garden, I called him up and asked if he would be the honoree in 2004. Typically for Jim, he did not agree to do it just to come and be honored at a dinner, but agreed to do it under conditions that he'd be able to give a public lecture. So I arranged one at Asia Society, which filled the auditorium, and also give a tribute to collectors in New York City. This is after the gathering at the Met, long after the gathering at the Met. So it was his way to pay tribute. He also insisted that we go to the Signature Theater to see Bill Irwin performing, and certain museums in New York, including the Museum of Sex. So all of this, I think, is typical of Jim's breadth of understanding and also dedication, that he would take in a history graduate student and include me in that Red Detachment of Women. I'll forever be grateful for. Thank you.
My name's Elizabeth Wilson, and I returned after a year abroad back to Berkeley, where I was an undergraduate, in the fall of 1965, and I think I was in the very first James Cahill graduate group. They only let me into the art history department because I spoke German, which they thought was the fundamental requirement. They didn't care if I had an eye, was interested in art, German. And Jim fought long and hard to have them relinquish that requirement for his students, since it was not the primary language of importance. So I subscribe to everything my colleagues and friends, fellow graduate students have said, and I have a letter to read that Jim wrote me, and I will read it. Tokyo, 9th of September, 1969. Dear Elizabeth, I hope you are enjoying Japan and your visit with your friends in Yokohama. I have finally arrived in Tokyo and, as you know, have planned a series of visits to dealers, collectors, and museums, not to mention junk shops, for the next 10 days. There's a small group of students here, as well as my old friend Hugh Wass, who will join us. A young man called Mark Wilson, a graduate of Yale under Nelson Wu, and currently a Ford Foundation intern of Larry Sickman's at the Nelson Gallery, will also be part of the group. He has made several museum appointments, including storage at the Nezu, to which he has invited us. He is handsome, speaks Chinese, and has a bright future in the field. He is also on his way to Taiwan next month to work at the Palace Museum. Since his topic of interest is Ma Yuan and yours, Xia Gui, it could be a perfect match. Ma and Xia. You might even consider marrying him if you can get rid of your current boyfriend. Please meet us both tomorrow morning at 9 for breakfast at the cafe in the basement of the Sony building to plan the viewing schedule. Jim. And there's an addendum to this, dated, the first was written 9th of September, 1969, and the addendum is the 2nd of August, 1975. Setting, San Francisco, home of my mother, Gerda Folder. Elizabeth descends the steel staircase at 206 Edgewood Avenue. The party is in the garden. It happens to be a wedding. The garden, one floor further down. I come down the stairs all by myself, and who's sitting at the piano as part of the string trio that my mother had hired? Sarah Cahill. I look at her and I say, "Sarah, what are you doing here?" And she said, "I'm the pianist in the trio." She looks at me and says, "What are you doing here?" And I said, "I'm the bride." Kismet.
Hello, I'm Dessa Goddard, Dessa Buxbaum then. I came to Berkeley in 1975 as a graduate student of David Keatley's, who's here in the audience this evening, and also took a number of courses from Jim Cahill, and Jim was on my orals committee in 1979. I'm now at Bonham's, which was then Butterfield's, now Bonham's, and I've been the director of the Asian Art Department since 1981, so a long time. Professor Cahill once said to me, "If a painting doesn't speak to you in under 2 seconds, move on." Those are blunt words from a Chinese historian turned auction house specialist who took courses from him in graduate school when I encountered him in a preview at Butterfield's, striding through the painting section of our sale, hoping he would stop, look, and say an encouraging word. His comments, as many of you know, could be brutal. But then he would have that twinkle in his eye, and he would say, "It's okay. I know you'll find something. Just keep at it." And then he would make a beeline for some painting, which was the reason for his visit. It's that encouraging, inspiring Professor Cahill that I will remember, who would say, "Come on, Dessa, push, study, keep looking. What do you think of that? Trust your instincts," as Arnold said as well. He was that quick mind who would look at something and say, "Oh, terrible, no, ha." Or would look at that and say, "Not so bad, come here. Let's take a look at that and talk together." Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Richard Vinograd. I'm somewhere in the early middle period, I guess, but somehow I seem to know everyone on the roster, so I think I must have stayed around way too long. I remember once when I was first here at Berkeley studying briefly with Peter Budberg, one of Jim's great heroes, him lamenting that when he, in his turn, had first been at Berkeley when professor passed away, basically the university was shut down for an afternoon, but now, this was in the early 1970s, they try to fit everything in within a passing period, 10 minutes or so, and I'm glad that we have time today to remember Jim as he deserves. I and my wife Sunny visited Jim just 2 days before he passed away, and I somehow thought during that visit, as he voice rumbled out of his chest and he got aroused about all kinds of current projects and future possibilities still then, even though he was very much resigned to what lay before him, to the possibility of new projects, new translations of his works, new circulations, and so on. And I left after a while thinking somehow, well, this won't be the last time. That energy seemed unstoppable. I came over here, actually, to the museum, and I was meeting a group of my students from across the bay, and we spent some time in the galleries looking at paintings. All of them virtually had some very close connection to Jim, things that he had acquired himself or acquired for the museum. And then Julia was kind enough to bring my students down into storage to look further at some of those works. And that really brought me back, because that, although I've spent time on at least 3 continents with Jim, in all kinds of places. We climbed Huangshan together for both of us for the first time. But that storeroom was, for me, the central place among all those places. It was where you got close to paintings. It was where I met Max Ler and Cece Wang for the first time. And that kind of fellowship of viewing and that kind of experience was the irreplaceable part of all of our educations, I think. I had the wonderful opportunity to bring my seminar a couple of years ago, which was devoted to connoisseurship, back to the museum when Jim could still attend and look at things with us in storage. And I'll never forget that experience, and on behalf of my students who've added their touching thoughts of being in that tradition of viewing and understanding based on even a briefest contact with Jim's understanding. Thank you.
I'm Barry McGrill. I knew Jim for about 10 years, from 2003 until he moved back to Berkeley, working for him first as a research assistant and then as a personal assistant as his needs changed over time. The whole time, he was in the role of active academic, scholar, and teacher, as you well know, and though he'd officially retired from teaching, teaching never left him. I spent hours with him, sitting beside him in his basement office while he attempted the impossible, teaching a 19th century specialist in architectural history, that'd be me, all about Chinese painting from the 12th to the 18th century. The names and dates slipped past me, but I learned 2 valuable lessons: the art of looking in great detail, and more importantly, that there's no due date on innovation. Here's a little story about the latter. Sometime in 2007, when I was sitting in that basement office, Jim said to me that he wanted to build a website that would contain all of his published writing. What's more, he wanted to record himself lecturing on all the art history subjects that he had done in the past. The trouble was, I'd never seen a website like the one he was describing. I knew it was possible to host his writings, and that happened fairly quickly. But the other thing, the lectures, was something else. I said it sounded like he wanted to be recorded on video. No, he said, not me, the paintings. I want the paintings on screen. I said, so you want me to record you doing a PowerPoint presentation? No, he said. Wait, does that have the pictures on the screen? Yes, I said. With me talking? He said. Yes, I said. With you talking. But there needs to be the part with you at the start and the finish, I said. But I don't want to be on camera, he said. Okay. Well, I said, what if we just shoot your head? And he said, no. Well, let me think about it and come back and see me next week. I came back the next week. Jim announced, okay, here's what I want. I want you to video me giving lectures, and we'll post the paintings so that viewers can see exactly what I'm talking about. It was then that he handed me a small box of 50 slides of paintings, and he said, get these scanned for the videos. And then he gestured to the shelves behind him, lined with dozens and dozens of small white boxes. There must have been more than 3,000 slides. I want all of this on my website, so they will be available to anyone, free for anyone who wants them. People can use them for whatever reason they want. And I want there to be a part at the start and the finish of each of the videos with me sitting here in my desk in the basement. Oh, he said, and I want each lecture on video to be 1 hour long. And I want there to be 14 of them. I didn't have the sense then to think that 14 hours of video would be difficult to produce. That's 2,640 minutes of video. And I had not produced a single minute of video in my life. But Jim believed in me, and I never turned him down for anything. And I trusted that he knew what he wanted and that what he wanted was possible, and it was a perfect match. Well, about that same time in 2007, a man by the name of George Siemens was experimenting with online video courses that would be available free to anyone who wanted them in the world. And I'm wondering if this is starting to sound familiar to you. Today, we call these courses MOOCs, or Massive Open Online Courses. These courses in calculus, chemistry, biology, history, and even art history are taught for free online to more than 7 million learners worldwide and growing. I won't contend that Jim invented MOOCs, but there he was in his basement thinking about free education to everybody in the world. In the end, he built over 40 hours of video lectures. This was and is an unparalleled achievement, no less so for a man working alone with one editor for over 4 years. His website regularly had over 2,500 visitors per month. He directly corresponded with dozens of students or fans, answering questions, writing long responses, practically writing theses for some. I'd never seen anyone type so fast or so accurately. I once asked him why he did it. Why did he give people so much information? He didn't have an answer. It was just what he did. He had so much knowledge and he knew it. He wanted to pass it along forever, and he did. I want to say that I miss him, and I do. But when I get that feeling, I just visit his website, and I watch a few minutes of a lecture, and then I look up and an hour's gone. And I feel better. Jim is still with me, and so I'll challenge all of us today to spend an hour with Jim on his website. Or binge all 42 hours of pure and remote view and gazing into the past, and you'll feel better too.
Good afternoon. I'm Katie Coffey. I worked for Professor Cahill as his assistant for 2 years, or as he would say, his helper. When I first started working for him, I was blown away by the time he spent mentoring strangers. One day, when I came to his house, he had printed out a 20-page paper emailed from a student he had never met before. Overnight, he had painstakingly gone through the paper, not only sharing his expertise on the subject matter, but also inserting commas and fixing other grammatical errors. He finished his email to the student with words of encouragement. This was not a rare occurrence. Later, I transcribed Professor Cahill's emails and blogs. He would effortlessly explain complex ideas. 4-syllable names of towns he hadn't been to in decades would easily roll off his tongue. Writing to a colleague, he told the story of visiting a friend's house to look at scrolls in Japan. They unrolled the scrolls diagonally from one corner of the house to the other. And he said, the house was small. No, scratch that. The house was elegant. This was typical of his thoughtful, considerate writing style. One day, during a visit to the oncologist's office, a nurse named Rose introduced herself. Without a moment's hesitation, Professor Cahill recited Gertrude Stein's I Am a Rose. His entertainer spirit injected some much-needed lightness to the office that day. Professor Cahill had the classic professorial hair, Einstein-like, with tufts jutting out in as many directions as he had ideas, complemented by his soft blue eyes. Other accessories rounded out his ensemble: leather suspenders, multiple pairs of reading glasses in close reach, and a trail of little scraps of paper with notes on them, all over, on the kitchen table, on his bedside table, for those middle-of-the-night inspirations, and of course, blanketing his desk. My favorite of these little notes was a request for me to buy tape, complete with a diagram he had sketched for me of the tape he wanted and the tape that he did not want. He wrote, "Please buy 2-inch tape, not 1-inch. Then he wrote in my predicted response, "But they don't have it." And his answer, "Keep looking, please." Professor Cahill's presence enriched the everyday ordinary with insightful humor, rich stories, and warm smiles with a pat on the shoulder. Professor Cahill did a fine job of leading by example. He relished the good things in life, especially chocolate peanut butter ice cream and sake. He was quick to count his blessings, proud and thankful for his 4 children and 6 granddaughters, all healthy and successful in what they are doing. To his students across the globe, he gave his knowledge freely, wanting to share a new world, undiscovered by many. To his friends, he gave hilarious stories, remembering details from centuries ago. To the people near him, he gave abundant gratitude and gentle hand squeezes. I will remember him as relishing life and sharing his passions with the world. Robert Henry said, "Art is like a footprint, which shows that one has walked bravely and with great happiness." This certainly applies to Professor Cahill. I will miss him.
Hi, I'm Benedict Cahill, and I am one of the sons of James Cahill. Today I'd like to share a poem with you that my dad had introduced me to, as he had done with so many of the things that I appreciate most. This is Invictus by William Ernest Henley. Out of the night that covers me, black as the pit from pole to pole, I thank whatever gods may be for my unconquerable soul. In the fell clutch of circumstance, I have not winced nor cried aloud. Under the bludgeonings of chance, my head is bloody but unbowed. Beyond this place of wrath and tears looms but the horror of the shade, and yet the menace of the years finds and shall find me unafraid. It matters not how straight the gate, how charged with punishment the scroll. I am the master of my fate. I am the captain of my soul. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Julian Cahill, another of his sons, and I would also like to share a poem. It's Reluctance by Robert Frost. Out through the fields and the woods and over the walls I have wended. I have climbed the hills of view and looked at the world and descended. I have come by the highway home, and lo, it is ended. The leaves are all dead on the ground, save those that the oak is keeping, to revel them one by one and let them go scraping and creeping out over the crusted snow when others are sleeping. And the dead leaves lie huddled and still, no longer blown hither and thither. The last lone aster is gone, the flowers of the witch hazel wither. The heart is still aching to seek, but the feet question whither. Ah, when to the heart of man was it ever less than a treason to go with the drift of things, to yield with a grace to reason, and bow and accept the end of a love or a season. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Fiona Cahill. These are my sisters, Abigail and Nora. We are 3 of the 6 grandchildren. And we have a couple of songs we'd like to share. Danny Boy and The Parting Glass. I will sleep in peace. I will dream of you. Oh, Danny boy, until you come to me. Oh, Danny boy, the pipes are calling from glen to glen and down the mountainside. The summer's gone and all the roses falling. 'Tis you, must go and I must bide. it snow, and I'll be here in sunshine or in shadow. Oh, Danny boy, I love you so. But when ye come and all the flowers are dying, and I am dead, as dead I well may be, you'll come and find the place where I am lying, and kneel and say an Ave there for me. And I shall hear, though soft, you tread above me, and all my grave shall warmer, sweeter be. For you will kneel and tell me that you love me, and I shall sleep until you come to me. I will sleep in peace, I will dream of you, oh Danny boy, until you come to me. Oh, the money that e'er I spent it in good company, and all the harm that e'er I've done, alas, it was to none but me. And all I've done for want of wit, to memory now I can't recall. So fill to me the parting glass. Good night, and joy be with you all. Oh, all the comrades that e'er I've had are sorry for my going away, and all the sweethearts that e'er I've had would wish me one more day to stay. But since it falls unto my lot that I should rise and you should not, I'll gently rise and I'll softly call, good night, and joy be with you all. Good night, and joy be with you all.
I'm Nick Cahill, and as a kid I had no interest in Chinese paintings, but I did like building things with my dad. He wasn't a great craftsman, but he had a term for his particular skill in such projects. He called it available wood carpentry, and you could make anything out of what was at hand. For Halloween one year when Sarah and I were small, he built this wonderful skeleton over life size and set it up for a haunted house in the basement. And the skull was made of paper mache molded over a balloon with old-fashioned clothespins, the kind that have just two prongs, as teeth. And he cut them out so that the prongs became the incisors and the solid part became molars. He made vertebrae out of tinker toys and spools strung together. That dates it there. And broomsticks for the arms and legs, and spools and buttons and other odds and ends for fingers and toes and wire coat hangers covered with tissue paper for ribs. And I'd always loved bones, even as a kid, and watching my father make this entire skeleton out of nothing was completely magical, almost godlike to me. And what I remember most was his joy in making it. And I was a kid and I saw just this collection of household bric-a-brac and stuff, but he had this vision in his mind of the whole thing, and it brought him such pleasure to discover that when you cut a clothespin in half, it would turn into 2 incisors and 1 molar. And we were both thrilled to see this creature come together and be born out of his imagination and a few odds and ends. Years later, Dad still remembered that skeleton, and on one of my last visits with him in the fall, he brought it up as one of the many happy projects that we'd made together. And I was delighted to be able to tell him that skeleton was still around in the basement, and I wanted to go over and bring it by and share it with him one last time. And that vision was one of his most remarkable characteristics. And just as he had a vision of a skeleton made of tinker toys and broomsticks, he had a vision of everything he wrote long before he put it on paper. And another vivid memory that I have was him in his study with this brand new electric typewriter. It wasn't his first electric typewriter, I think, but it was the first one that could sort of almost keep up with the fantastic pace of his mind. And I'm still in awe of the way he wrote, instead of writing something and scratching it out and gazing off into space, trying to think of the right word and so forth, that Dad just had it all inside him, like Athena, ready to be born fully grown from his head. He just needed the right tools to bring it out at his own speed. And he'd sit, as people have said, at his desk for hours. The typewriter would be rattling like a machine gun, spitting out words without ever slowing down or pausing except to reload with paper. And then he'd go over and proofread occasionally, but basically he just had so much in his head, so fully developed and organized. And we've seen that all with the way he could lecture for hours without notes and digress effortlessly into arcane topics and pull any name or image that he wanted out of his head. And so one of the things I'm most grateful for is that this vision stayed with him until the end, and even when it became difficult for him to get around and so forth, he could create these video lectures, work on projects, talk with colleagues who visited him, and think and gaze at the pictures and listen to the poetry and the music in his own mind. Lots of people aren't so lucky, and although he was weak and ill, his mind was as sharp as ever, and he was very much Dad until the end. And I just wanted to say also that he was so proud of Ben and Julia, and he talked about them all the time, and the music they played, and the projects, and the awards and achievements. And it was sort of an odd coincidence for me that when they were born, my wife and I had just had twins a couple years ago, and one of them was just singing. And it's not easy having twins, and especially if you're old enough to be the grandfather of twins already. And so I was put in the odd position of being able to give parental advice to my father. And he was so delighted then to be able to go back and do it again. And it was wonderful for me then to see him from the outside as the father of young children again, and to be able to reminisce and reimagine our own adventures together of long ago. So, Dad, thank you and farewell.
And I'm Sarah Cahill. And my father lived a good, long life, but I can't help but wish he were here today to see his friends and family and colleagues in one place. This would make him so happy, seeing us all here today. And every day I think of things I want to be doing with him, going on a picnic at Mount Tamalpais, visiting the gibbons at the Oakland Zoo, watching Chushingura together. And I think of this theater, the old Pacific Film Archive, how many movies we watched right here, how excited he would get at a retrospective of Truffaut or Ozu, and how irked he would be if there were one person in line ahead of us. But he would be so proud of this gathering today in the Berkeley Art Museum that was so close to his heart. He was so proud when Nick became director of the dig at Sardis, and proud to see Ben and Julian go to college. He would be so thrilled to know that Julian just saw Die Fledermaus at the Metropolitan Opera and that Ben heard Mahler's Resurrection Symphony just last weekend at Hertz Hall. And he was so proud of Fiona for the political work she's been doing, dedicated to the progressive causes that were always so vital to him. And I just want to say that Julia was right with him in the last few months and weeks, and they were making plans for a Zhang Daqian show, and that really, it gave him a will to live. He was the kind of father who made sure we knew Shakespeare and Buster Keaton and Stravinsky and Jean Renoir's Rules of the Game. He was the kind of father who could take a coat hanger and while we were having dinner, could turn it into a Calder circus monkey in a few minutes, just bending a few wires and there it is. A few years ago when he was with us in Inverness for a couple of weeks in the summer, he asked me what I wanted for my birthday, and I told him I wanted him to write me a sonnet. His response was Shakespearean or Petrarchan. And then, of course, he didn't write one sonnet. He wrote one every day and shared them with Miranda and eventually sent them in this envelope. And they're all on these little bits of paper. I kept asking him, I said, let me get you a notebook. And he just loved these little bits of paper. And as Nick said, you know, he could just write these things off the top of his head with almost no editing. He just could think in rhymed iambic pentameter. He could also be difficult. He always needed to win every argument and have the last word. And he could be so stubborn. And I think of Ralph Waldo Emerson's eulogy for his friend Henry David Thoreau. When he talks about Thoreau's stubbornness, he says, "As for taking his arm, I should as soon think of taking the arm of an elm tree." And that was often how it was with my dad. But he loved a good argument, and he didn't want you to just agree and nod your head in agreement. He wanted a sparring partner, which is why it was always so great to watch him and my husband John argue about John Cage and Marcel Duchamp. He was also unbendingly strict about the elements of style and grammar that Katie talked about. And one of the most alarming signs of his decline over the last year was when he sent me an email and spelled the possessive its as IT''S. I want to talk about the last few years of his life because right now those are the most important to me. Those long waits at Alta Bates, getting an X-ray or a CAT scan or getting radiation treatments, those were precious hours with him. He couldn't just lie there. He had to entertain himself by singing old songs or reciting poetry. And if he recited Coleridge's Kublai Khan, he would tell the nurse that Xanadu was actually the Chinese place named Shangdu, and there was no question in his mind that anyone in that hospital room would be fascinated by that fact. There are two people who gave him the best last year of his life that he could possibly have had. Gina Boucher was his 24-hour caregiver who tended to him with such amazing care. Katie Coffey is just an extraordinary person. She handled every aspect of his life that he couldn't manage himself and really became part of the family. And every day, my father told me how fortunate he was to have Katie and Gina with him, and they were there with him until the very end. I feel like I was only beginning to understand my father in the last few years, and I was so grateful for that time with him. But I've also learned a great deal about him from those who understood him best, who are here in this room today. Julia and Howard and Marianne and Pat and Rick and Arnold, you knew him so well, and he truly lives on through you. And it's also an incredible gift that we have in his video lectures. There are more to come, thanks to Skip Sweeney and Video Free America. And we're going to watch a video in just a moment, but I'd like to introduce William Ma. And I'd also like to call Nick and Ben and Julian back here too.
Hi, my name is William Ma. I'm a PhD candidate here at UC Berkeley in art history, studying with Pat Berger. As you walk in, there's a reproduction of The Fisherman by Wu Zeng. The painting in many ways serves as a signpost for highlights of his career. It was an important painting in his dissertation, and his current location, the Freer Gallery in Washington, D.C., where he was a former curator before he became a Berkeley professor. The painting was mounted lovingly by Mr. Kawazu with the assistance from Julia, and here, Julia White, also David Hope from the Freer Gallery. The scroll was made entirely possible with contribution from more than 30 of his students. It is a testimony of his continuing and enduring influence for our generation and future generation of East Asian art historians. This is our small gesture to pay our respect and our debt to our academic grandfather. And I invite all of you to sign the scroll if you haven't done so after the memorial. And I would like to now formally present, it's only a box, but this to his family. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. We have one last bit of video here where my father surprised Skip Sweeney and his crew by saying, I want to record a little video that was something different from what he usually did. So here it is, and please come to the reception afterwards in Babette's Cafe.
I've asked Skip Sweeney and his people to keep the camera running and keep the lights on and keep the equipment here while I talk a bit in a kind of last video lecture to be posted at that time when I, how to put it, joined my ancestors, move into the afterlife, all the circumlocutions that we have for avoiding the simple word dying. So anyway, at that time, I want to have this final thing posted saying generally that I'm very happy to have discovered this new medium late in my life after a whole many decades of lecturing, giving it's not video lectures, but slide lectures, and publishing, and so all the rest of it. Somehow this new medium, I was fortunate enough to discover through the help of some people, this new medium which allows me to put so much of what I think I still understand and know, apart from what other people know, in a way that preserves it and presents the images better than anything I had available earlier. So at any rate, so I want to say how happy I've been to be able to move into this new medium and to present these at great length, absolutely no limitations, and just to sort of do sort of a general farewell. There's a book behind me on the shelf. I don't have to get it down because I know it, by Clarence Day. Clarence Day was a playwright, author, and so on, best known for something called Life with Father, but that's not my favorite. My favorite is a book, which most people don't know, called Scenes from the Mesozoic. And it's one of the 3 American funnies, which I present in my video of that title, along with works by Gillette Burgess and George Price. And in that, Clarence Day has a whole series of essays with pictures, verses with pictures. And the last of them, which I don't have to open the book for, but I can get, I'll give it to Skip Sweeney later to copy the picture. The picture, anyway, this is the last of his series. And it's about himself, and it shows himself caricatured by himself with his glasses on, being pulled off the screen by some creature. And he is saying, and the verse goes, "Farewell, my friends, farewell and hail. I'm off to seek the Holy Grail. I cannot tell you why. Remember, please, when I am gone, 'twas aspiration led me on. Tiddly-widdly toodaloo, all I want is to stay with you, but here I go, goodbye." So there, that's a suitable verse, not very profound, but just right for my purpose to sort of bid farewell and say how happy I've been to have this, I say, long and successful and rewarding career with so many marvelous people in it and so many publications and all the things that I've loved doing. And so tiddly-widdly toodaloo and farewell. Yours truly, James Cahill. The end. Turn off the machine. Thank you.